This isn't just kumbaya talk. Purpose drives impact. Looking to empower up your day? Tune in to Evolve Together with Empower People on ESPN Richmond, powered by MikeKingBiz. Join me, host and Empower People founder Tiffany Joy Greene, MBA, as I bring dynamic leaders, change makers, and entrepreneurs to share their journeys, challenges, and successes while driving their purpose to drive positive impact and empower people. Empower People is an organization that provides education, connection, and support to mission and purpose-driven leaders to drive positive impact and empower people. Catch us every Tuesday at 5 a.m. on ESPN Richmond and join Empower People today. What are you waiting for? We even have a free membership. That's right, free. Visit www.empowerpeople.org. That is MPWRPeople.org. You can also visit us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Evolve Together. Welcome to Evolve Together with Empower People, the show that brings you inspiring stories, expert insights, and transformative advice, and I like to think a little bit of laughs. On ESPN Richmond, powered by MikeKingBiz. I'm your host, Tiffany Joy Greene, founder of Empower People, and we also got Chris Mayfield, who is our COO. Each week, we dive into topics that are rooted in how purpose drives business and positive impact. Join us as we connect with dynamic guests, explore innovative ideas, and empower you to evolve and thrive in every aspect of your life. Stay tuned because together we can achieve greatness. Let's evolve together. To learn more about Empower People, you can visit www.empowerpeople.org. That's MPWRPeople.org. Or you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn. #Empower People. So let's get to it. Today is our Empower Hour. And during our Empower Hour, we like to answer questions that people may have. You could probably see if you're watching, we do have a guest here. We're not going to put him in the hot seat. But Mark, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask.
I will.
One thing I can tell you that, or do you have a question? I don't mean to cut you off.
No. Not. Point.
One of the things I think that would be good to cover is how do we handle communication during an uncertain time? And we can fill in that uncertain time with whatever blank that might be. Could be because of economy. It could be because of a business change, maybe a merger, an acquisition, anything. There's a lot of reasons why something can feel uncertain. So let's talk about that a little bit today, because I don't know about you and how your social media is looking, but I think this is pretty on point and on target for the current climate. So how do we address communications during uncertain times in the workplace? And I'm going to really, I love doing this. I'm going to put Chris Mayfield in the hot seat and force him to get off mute to get the ball rolling.
I love being put on the spot and in the hot seat all at the same time. It's like my favorite thing on Mondays. I have that saying, Tiffany, you may recall, is don't mess with Mondays. And right now you're messing with Monday. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm poking the bear. Hey, you were in the military for 25 years. You're in the Marines. This is nothing compared to
this isn't too bad.
Yeah.
From a pure leadership and organizational development standpoint, the academic answer to your question is, well, if you want your people to communicate during crisis or uncertain times, you necessarily would have had to have built a foundation of communication, right? You can't just show up one day and say, today, as opposed to yesterday, I'm a master communicator and I'm going to tell you what's going on, right? So that's number one, is if you don't already have a culture of communication and sharing and that expectation is already built, then you're already behind. So if you do, good job, yay, you. Then it's a matter of tweaking your message and putting out information that is going to be relevant and timely to the right people. So if you're in that previous category where there is no resilience already built, information resilience and productivity resilience already built. Uh, One thing, there's kind of, in my mind, there's kind of a couple phases to this. One is you don't want to lose credibility, right? So you don't want to lose any of that connection that you already have by trying to hide things and keep people in the dark and not share information. The next thing is you want to add credibility and trust to your organization. So how do you do that, right? That's through the consistent communication, reassurance, and honesty, right? And being authentic in your message and telling things like it is. So I think depending on which bucket you're in, that's how I would approach it. And hopefully everyone listening, I'm sure, already has their crisis communication or their uncertainty communications plans already built out. They already know who's, and I promise you, nobody listening has done that. But at any rate, that would be my goal for communication in uncertain times.
Yes, and I like what you're saying there. So you can not feel like you're in the hot seat, Chris, because
I appreciate that. Thank you.
we're simpatico. But one of the things that I see that Mark put in the chat was about transparency and about
Yep.
how if you don't communicate, people create their own stories, right? And
Yep.
that's the true, right? Right. When you are in life, I don't care if it's professional or personal, if you don't have the answer, you want to have the answer because we do not like feeling like we're out of control. So perception is reality. So we'll bundle whatever we see before us and come up with our own story. Even if it's a completely wrong story, it just makes us feel a little bit more comfortable that we figured it out, right?
Yep.
So who wants a narrative being created about them? Does that ever work in your favor? I don't think
Does
so.
not.
Probably not.
It's best to keep the ball in your court and share your narrative and be transparent, right? So the best thing you can do in uncertain times is to communicating, like you said, Chris. The best thing to do is create that culture before you're in the uncertain times, so that way when you're in the uncertain times, you already have that foundation of communication and transparency to start from. But the reality is, and during uncertain times, what do we all want during a period of uncertainty?
Yeah,
Beyond
we
the
want. Yeah.
transparency.
And Mark can chime in if he chooses to, but I think what we want is the pain to stop, right? We want the whatever pain we're experiencing, we want it to stop. We want to return to normal. Think about COVID, right? And how it kind of reshaped what normal was. But in the very beginning, people were struggling. How do we get back to normal? In that case, we don't, right? We things are have changed since COVID, and they may never go back to the way they were. So, and that's an extreme example of difficult times. But so when we argue and we not argue, when we struggle to how to get back to normal, ultimately we may be disappointed because we may never get back to normal. So instead of focusing on how do we get back to normal and get out of the pain, we should look at what does tomorrow look like and how do we make that less painful or not painful. Do we need to adjust our culture? Do we need to adjust things inside our business from a process standpoint or a methodology standpoint that leads us back to a place where we're comfortable, but also recognizes the impact recognizes and accounts for the impact of the uncertainty that we're experiencing today.
What I would add to it is, to your point, we need to take away the pain, and it's where's that light at the end of the tunnel, right? So I've got to be able to set some goalpost and feel that it's achievable, because without some goal of, it maybe that it's a new norm, but it's a norm that people would be comfortable with. But without that goalpost, where am I heading, right? And so I need that light. It's that old cliche, at the light at the end of the tunnel, to look forward to, and then see small incremental pieces that get us closer to that goal. And that starts alleviating the stress in uncertain times. But without that, that's where the pain just enumerates. It just keeps rolling.
And to elaborate on that, I would say that the light at the end of the tunnel is it's goals, but it's also saying in uncertain times, what causes the stress and the crisis and the uncertainty are the things that I have no control over, and that makes me feel icky and scared and afraid.
Yep.
So what we need to do is we got to say, okay, these are the things that are beyond our control. We can't do anything about this, but these are the things we can do. These are the things that are within our control, and that's what makes us feel a little bit happier, right? Because these are okay, so let's focus on what we can control, and that helps us that's the light at the end of the tunnel, right? And so I think when we're communicating in uncertain times is people need to feel like we got to acknowledge the elephant in the room, right? We can't ignore, if we ignore it, we know what happens. The elephant will trample everything in its place, right? So we have to address the elephant in the room. And then two, okay, we got the elephant in the room, but what can we do? Knowing that the elephant is, what can we do? Knowing that we have this, what can we do? Not, we might not be able to remove the elephant in the room. Like, for example, if it's a recession, man, I wish I could wave my magic wand and make the recession go away, but I can't. So we got the elephant in the room. Let's address it. What can we do to create a better environment for us all so the elephant doesn't trample us all to death, right? So that's the reality with communications. And what do you think is I apologize in advance. I think I speak like a teacher. I do come from a long line of teachers, and even though I did not go to school for teaching, I think it's built in the DNA. What do you think is the most important part of communication, especially in certain times, other than transparency? It's empathy, right? If you're facing a uncertain time, whatever that may be, no one's listening to you unless you get it from their perspective. How many of us have worked somewhere where the organization faced uncertain times, and when they made their maybe gave a town hall, distributed an email, had a meeting, pick one of the various forms of channels of communication, you were talked out without any consideration for you and your fellow teammates. And how did that make you feel?
It breaks the trust barrier.
That's right. And when they tell you what the steps are moving ahead, how much are you jazzed about following those steps?
Not.
Not at all. So has anyone here worked in an organization where they were facing uncertain times and the organization did a bang up job of getting you through that? Chris is just like,
I've had it both ways.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I've had it both ways. And the one place was interesting. It was facing chapter 11. And so long story short, the previous CEO made a few purchases and it created a cash flow issue. And so at the point that it was recognized, here's the plan moving forward, you're going to go with a year without raises. There's going to be a downsizing. But what the executives did, which was interesting, was they not only they froze salaries, but the executive team, even though they're well compensated, all took a pay cut as a show of good faith that they were in this too, and that it was something that the organization had to accomplish together, not any one individual or team. And that the way they communicated it and the subsequent plan had people buy in. And it was interesting because I've seen it fail as well, but this one group was led by a gentleman who was actually a former Walmart executive. And he just really understood people. He understood how to communicate with them and talk to them. And this guy was super transparent. So everybody understood where we were, what got us there, and here's our pathway out. And this, if everybody can come together, then we could survive as an organization. But if we all aren't willing to sacrifice, we aren't going to survive as an organization. So it was a really interesting, and it worked. And they were healthy for the next 12, 13 years. So
that's a good story. Chris, you came off mute. That tells me you have something to say.
No, I have never experienced a great turnaround story. And I think what that means is there's not a lot of organizations that are prepared and ready to do it. You're, I've had some fantastic leaders in the corporate world who, when it came to crisis, when it came to communication, particularly downstream, not upstream, they were they you got the sense that they already knew the solution and they were going to do the solution whether you liked it or not, or regardless of how you feel about it. And that may be the fact, right? That may be the fact that this was going to happen regardless of how you feel about it. But that doesn't mean that you have to let everybody develop their own narrative and their own answer for what's going to happen to them. So to me, that you can do difficult things. You can do difficult things that people aren't going to like, and it's okay. There's a window manufacturer up in the Northeast, and I'm not going to throw names around, that I did some work for. And aside from the work that I did for them, they had this really cool thing where the business needs made them close their plant for 6 weeks. So they closed down for January through half of February, right? And then the rest of the time they did full production. So instead of just doing that and telling people, oh, you got to figure it out, what they did was they let people bank bank their time off. They let people switch in and out, trade vacation time amongst themselves. It was all very controlled, but they allowed people to prep and do that. And so when they started the program, their hair was on fire, right? They were like, oh, this is terrible. But by the end of it, everybody accepted the fact that they had to take 4 weeks off without pay. But they could manage that among themselves and work with their peers and work with their supervisors to do it in a way that felt less stressful, less terrible for them. So there are ways to do difficult things, and a lot of it is how we communicate it, and if we show the empathy and we show the willingness to be a little bit flexible and resilient in our own management leadership styles.
I like that. I appreciate that too. And I think from my history, I have a lot of history of having to manage crisis and crisis communications.
Oh, wow.
So I've been hired to come in to deliver bad news. Let's just be clear. And so when I have been charged with that task, usually it's we are in a bad state. We'd like to turn things around. Don't know how we're going to do that. But we gotta turn things around, because whether or not this business is shuttering its doors or it's on the verge and we don't want that to happen, we gotta help us make this happen. So because we still got production to meet, or we still got quality to meet, there's all these things we still gotta do. And so how did I do it? What I learned quickly and really fast, because yes, I learned some of this stuff in school, and I do think my education played a role in helping me, but also I got on the job training. So, meaning I trained myself. So, what I learned was, shocking, purpose matters. So, and what we talk about with purpose is, if you're in a form of a crisis, we want to know, why are we in crisis, and why are we still here, and why are we fighting?
Mhm.
Right? So that purpose is what carries us through. But number two, and this is where a lot of organizations really F up, and yes, I said F up, I would say the other word, but then the FCC would come after us. But this is where we really F up, is the fact that we don't do purpose alignment. So if the organization's purpose is make widgets for this industry to make better lives for these communities, totally made that up. That didn't sound good, so you could tell it was made up. Okay, we got that. That's the organization's purpose. But here's where it really matters. that's great for the organization. And yes, we got Kumbaya and all these people in the organization are vying for this purpose, right? We're all coming together, we're working together for this purpose. But shocking, they may have their individual purposes. I know, right? An organization, assuming that people may have their own lives outside of the organization and may, in fact, have another purpose, whether that purpose is, hey, I play in a rock band on the weekends and music's really my true love or passion, or I like to volunteer in charity work, and that's really this job helps me fund all these amazing things that I'm doing that you have no clue about, right? So the organization's got to find that sweet spot of where the organization's purpose is aligned also with the individual purpose alignment. So what does that take? That takes actually getting to know your people and building relationships with these people and making sure that not only the organization's purpose is being carried and move forward, it's making sure that their individual purposes are moving forward as well. How many people have worked in an organization where they did that? And then they wonder why people don't stick around.
It is
Where's their
interesting.
loyalty?
It's interesting, and I've heard it recently in the last, I'll say, 12 months, where people said they just need to get over it. And it's like, that's not a way to keep people wanting to come in and produce their best work in a time of, let's just say, crisis, right? I mean, it's just when you hear that, it's like, wow, how did that individual and then several individuals along with them get to that point where they felt that was an appropriate way to think? Because at that point, you're so disengaged from your workforce that you can claim you have empathy, but you clearly don't think that way and make decisions with that in that realm.
Fun when you say that. There's a little I'm not naming names, so if anybody who's watching on my Facebook names a name, I'm neither confirming nor denying whatever you say. But one entity I consulted for, I carried them and their communications to a point they were still in crisis, but out of the flames, we'll call it that way, right?
Mhm.
And I didn't know I was hired to do this, so that was fun. So once I carried them through the flames, I asked somebody, I said, now that I'm working on this and, we've got a plan, and I'm working with all the people to make sure everybody's got a plan, that everyone's going to have a job once this is all said and done, or they're retiring, or they're living out their purpose, right? They're doing what they want to do. Now just, hey, we got these options on the table, take one, it's your problem now. No, we actually made sure that everybody was going to move on to something that they wanted to move on to. I actually said, what about me? You know what I was told? Verbatim, will never forget it as long as I live. Because I think my jaw, I'm surprised I didn't have to ask an engineer to come into the room and fix my jaw from laying on the floor.
Yeah.
I said, what about me? And they said, how dare you make this about yourself when we have all these men who have their families that they have to take care of? Let's process that for a moment.
Yeah, I'm thinking something a little out of date there, mainly attitudes.
This is
Still
like
happens,
watching
man.
Mad Men on TV right now.
It still happens. It still happens.
I understand, and I've witnessed this, not to that severity, but that is an era gone by, eras gone by.
So,
Tiffany, did you also think you were going to get to vote? Is that?
there's more to these stories than I can share, but that was a fun and interesting time. Though this particular workforce was predominantly male. And there are certain industries that lag in their progressiveness than others, and we'll just say it that way. But the best way to counter it is, speaking as the person who countered it, is to flat out say that's wrong, and to embody what modern, what people should be looking at as a modern day world. So I did not, obviously, if anybody knows me, they know that I didn't, yes, my jaw hit the floor because I couldn't believe what I said, but then the jaw kind of quickly came back up and the mouth wasn't moving in a very respectful and professional way, but still, yeah. So, but the key to that experience was I was, and many experiences, because like I say, I have, there's something, before I even knew that, I guess I have a talent of helping bring people through on certain times. It took me a minute to figure out, wow, I keep finding myself in these awkward situations. Oh, there must be some reason why. And that's because communications during uncertain times is just like anything else. Communication is more than the words we speak. It's the strategy and the purpose behind those words.
Yeah.
And it's just like when you build a culture and people think culture sounds nice. It all sounds floofy and like, oh, soft. And it's just a nice word that we use, but we don't have any control over it. That's all BS. Like everything we say out of our mouth, the culture that we have is actually should be purpose driven and is built brick by brick, just like you build, a car by piece. You build your culture piece by piece too.
And unfortunately, you can break a culture a heck of a lot faster than it took to build it.
Same with a car.
And well, that's my point. But it's interesting because pre-COVID, I was fortunate to work with a group of people that they openly said they felt like second-class citizens. And over a period of a year and a half, 2 years prior to COVID, we created a very cohesive work unit where people were valued, but more importantly, of being valued, they felt being valued. But when COVID hit, all of a sudden we went from a very methodical organization including input from, teams and stuff like that to know you've got to do this now because it's a new mandate. And what that did was it destroyed everything it took us 2 years to build. And it took, once we got on the other side of COVID, it took another year to rebuild it. It was rebuildable a lot quicker than it was when the first time around, because they knew what it was like to be there previously. But that change in how we work due to the rules that were handed to us, it was do it now because it was a new mandate from wherever it came from and, for everybody's safety, but it wasn't seen that way. It was seen as a violation of how we work together and how we value each other's opinions. And it didn't matter how much you tried to explain it, the fact that we didn't go through this inclusive process up front, it breaks so fast. And I've seen more extreme examples take down an entire organization. But that one was the most relevant one in terms of because you build something with 100+ people and then it all gets taken away and it's like, wow.
I've encountered that as well, as where I was brought in to save a business. And we were making great strides because when I was brought in as a person to help save the business, and I use those words because those were the words that were used with me.
Sure.
Okay. It doesn't, no one person can save a business. No one person can really save much of anything, right? It takes a community to do that. And for as much progress that we made, I inevitably left to go to the next gig. And because they didn't have that village, that community anymore, it all went away so fast. So fast, and I cried. I'm not gonna lie, I cried because I thought, because of the blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, but more importantly, that purpose and that vision of where it was going, it would have been monumental for that community. And so to see it go away, man, that was hard. It was hard.
Yeah.
And the root to that is why did that happen is because, again, it takes a team effort in every organization. Oh, you're raising your hand, Chris. You're
Wow,
by the rules.
look at that.
Look at that.
Technology.
You gotta play as a team, and you gotta be on the same page, and that purpose is the unifier. And that's oftentimes the biggest disconnect, is the purpose. Or there's multiple purposes playing in an organization. And so then you got a hot mess on your hands, right? But Chris, I see your hand. I respect the hand. You have the floor, sir.
So the thing that we are talking around, that the most important thing, I think, I'm going to try and make this as quick as possible. I know we're running out of time. Is it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to lose your organization. You don't have to lose people. You don't have to suffer any of these negative consequences to difficult times if you are building the right communications plan and the right communication methodologies that are flexible and that are familiar and comfortable, because how we communicate with people is almost as important as what we're communicating to them. So, or is it probably at least as important to as that's not the right hand. So, we don't have to suffer all these negative consequences behind difficult times. We don't have to. There are things that we can do, build those communications plans, those communication messages, assign responsibility for communication ahead of time, do all those things ahead of time to minimize those disruptions, to minimize the control of the narrative. If you're not in charge of your culture, if you're not in charge of your narrative, somebody else is. So there's a ton of things that we can do to stay in charge of the narrative and stay in charge of the culture. So, it doesn't have to be all bad. And everybody loves to tell about the time where this organization fell apart and it was terrible. But let's talk, those organizations that communicate well, that have a good culture, that are resilient. And those things don't happen by accident, right? That takes an incredible force, some foresight, some planning, some documentation, and sharing, right? If bad things happen, here's how we're going to respond. And then people know it's coming and they're not surprised. They're not taken back. And that goes a long, long way in being prepared for difficult times. And once you're in difficult times, it still doesn't have to be life altering or life changing or soul crushing or soul sucking, whatever you want to call it. There's ways to handle that. And there's ways to communicate it that are both reassuring but also meet business goals. So we don't have to live in the doom and gloom just because times are difficult. So I just want to throw that out there, and we can tie that back to purpose. And if we build that communication plan around our purpose, and then we assign responsibilities, we assign roles, we assign the mechanical things, chat and text and public radio announcements, all those things, communicating with media, and we all know what's going to happen before we get there. Much easier to manage. So it doesn't have to be the end of the world. It's not the apocalypse. It is just, it may feel like it, but it's not. And if we're prepared for it, we're so much the better.
So one of the things that you said, we were circling something and we're not stating the obvious. Well, there was something that I think we need to articulate well, that we have not articulated well, is as we discuss communications, we talk about communications. I've noticed this, all three of us. I'm not pointing the finger at any single person. It's all of us, especially Chris. But anyway, okay. He pointed at himself. He did it to himself. We're talking about what we're communicating. Communication is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. And where's the number one mistake most organizations make? It's not just that they aren't communicating or they're not sharing information. The reality is their communication is based on listening and active listening. So communication is only as effective as to how much you're listening to your people, right? So like Chris was just saying, like, it's not the apocalypse. It doesn't have to be, but if your people are feeling like it is, let them vocalize that so you can now address it. Because if you're just up there and you're giving like, this isn't the end of the world, but you haven't listened to your people as to why they may feel that way, it's a moot point. They've tuned you out. They don't care
So,
what you say.
so it really, it's a combination, right? You've got to have a leader that's bought into the plan, right? It's going to live the plan. But the big thing that that feedback channel and willing to listen, because I actually witnessed saying, oh, we're going to have a town hall. We didn't like how people were asking questions the previous town hall. So let's change the format so the leadership team won't be as uncomfortable. And it's like, whoa, wait, this is not about comfort. If somebody has something on their mind, and yes, most people are earnest in their approach. Every once in a while, you get somebody that's, what's the word? I'm not sure the right word to use, that is over the top. Maybe that's a good word. That's, not really, in that reality space, but you got to give people that voice. Without having a voice, then yeah, I can talk at you all day long. That's not communication, to your point. I've got to take feedback, because that may alter either just simple communication, what information I share, or it might help form the path and how it needs to be updated or changed.
And a lot of times when all you do is feed the communication out and you're not taking anything, you're just sharing in an echo chamber. You're just listening to yourself talk, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're making all kinds of assumptions, oh, my people are worried most about XYZ, it may not be the very thing they're worried about, right? So town halls are a really great example. If you're doing a town hall, and again, I know different size organizations might have different prep work for the town hall. I've worked for major corporations that do mega town halls. And what should be done, it's like, if you think of like a political debate, right? There's a lot of practice before that political debate. They showed out a lot of questions, prepare you so you're ready for any of the questions that may come to the table. The same is true for a town hall. You need to have people on your team that can go, these are some of the questions, or you're going to get variations of these types of questions. So that way leadership is feeling prepared to answer, guess what? The really super duper tough questions. And it is up to leadership to be able to handle that. And, I know this is, I'm going to be very bracing here, but like, your team is not there for you. It's not about the leader and their ego, right? When you're a leader, you're there to serve the people. So you're actually there for them. So it is your job and your responsibility to go kick your ego to the curb and put them first.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do. I say that like it's easy, right? Because it is our natural instinct to want to self-preserve.
I've actually had 2 instances in the last few years where I had to bring a group of people together and tell them to check their egos at the door. And in one particular group, I said, before we continue, I said, I need everybody to look in the mirror and realize that there's not one person on this call. That's not a reason why we're having this call, where we're at right now. And we need to make a plan to move forward. And it was interesting, there was silence. But what came out of that meeting was a group of people that came up with a plan, pulled it forward, but the big part is up front just saying, look, there's rules of engagement in today's meeting. One is check your ego. And it was amazing that, and then look in the mirror, because you're also responsible for where we are right now. So there was no innocent party on that in that meeting. And so since it was a collective and there was no, you, I think it was an easier pill for people to swallow, but it was interesting. But that little simple thing of checking your ego, that most people don't do that well.
Yeah.
And I was surprised at the buy-in I got in that call.
That's when you got to bring out the Brene Brown and start talking about vulnerability. But also I think when we're talking about communications during stressful, uncertain times, gotta just sometimes we have let's say okay, we can make a safe assumption, right? Let's say a business is facing the possibility of closure,
Mhm.
So we can make a safe assumption that a lot of people are going to be freaking out
Mhm.
about income. Like, what am I going to do for myself? Even the women, wink, wink, if you remember what I said previous.
You have a
But
partner?
I was told there's a lot of men who are working here who have families to support. And you're, wow. But anyways, um, so you have that. But there's also this, I remember that with this one entity where one of the things that in the town hall, that if the town halls hadn't been conducted in such a way where there was that two-way communication, I don't know if certain egos would have been able to know this, which was they were concerned that the legacy, generational legacy, was
Mhm.
going to become invisible.
Hmm.
Because for some organizations that have existed for decades, maybe
Mhm.
centuries, right? They have generations of family that have worked there, and they take
Yeah.
pride in that the generational job. It's like they feel like it's part of their DNA. And
Yeah.
when these things close, well, what does that mean for our family legacy, right? What are you going to do with that? What's your answer?
That's
Right? What are
that's
you
a tough one.
prepared to do? Well,
Yeah.
when I was in that position, because I was responsible for the communications, I created video and books to document the history and then had that placed in museums so that way the future generations, existing and future generations, could go back and look so that history isn't dead.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Right? That makes people go, hey, it's not all for naught. It
Mhm.
still lives on, and it may not live the way I thought it was going to live on, and maybe it's not, my daughters, my granddaughters, I'm being purposeful when I'm saying daughters now, granddaughters, may not be able to live these roles, but they still can go back and see what my generation and the previous generations did,
Yeah.
right? But how would we have known that that was such a important aspect of a feeling of, that was being impacted on these employees had we not listened?
Yeah. You listened to who they were and what their concerns were, and that their family purpose was gonna cease to exist.
Thank you for saying the word purpose. Bravo. You just said purpose. Thank you. Chris is, oh
It
no.
takes a small victory for today.
But it's true, like people, it is, I'm not trying to say that you know, supporting your family with the, salary, wages and all. I mean, yeah, that's a given. Everybody is concerned about that. We all have bills we have to pay. That's important. But you know what? Purpose plays a role too. And we
Mhm.
have to understand what that may look like for everybody on your team, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when we really understand that communication is first, what if we were to take the big pieces out of today's conversation, I think we would say communication's a two-way street. It's actually more about listening than talking.
It is.
It's not the end of the world, right? Right, Chris? If we build the foundation early, when we hit that uncertain time, it won't be so chaotic and crisis worthy, right?
Well, there is no crisis because it's operating procedure. Then everybody already knows what to do or has a sense of what to do,
Yeah.
and already kind of has a feel for what the message is and how it's going to relate. So it's actually the best deterrent, or not deterrent, mitigation for crisis, right? So it's um, there's always challenges, there's always problems. It's just how effective are at dealing with those ahead of time without really knowing what they are. And it's a gift, right? It's a talent that can be learned. So and it's a process that can be followed. So yeah, let's call it apocalypse avoidance.
I like that. I'd also like to say that one of the things, that I think what I learned in my career, here's what I learned in my career. And I think any small to mid-sized business or nonprofit should pay attention to what I'm about to say. Do you know where successful large organizations invest? and do not cut in times of crisis. Communications. They sink more money into it. So if you are in crisis, or you're nervous that you're going to be facing a crisis, and you may be thinking, okay, I got to bring in some resources, I got to get some help, I got to try to find a way to handle this impending crisis I think may be looming, or to avoid the crisis, whatever that may be. Make sure you're investing in your communications, because no matter what you're doing to circumvent or face that crisis head on, it doesn't mean squat if you don't have the communications in place to deal with it.
So what's interesting is if you look at a consumer products, organization, one of the first things they do in times of tightening budgets is they cut marketing. The one thing that's supposed to drive their brand and give attention to who they are. And it's interesting because it's a two-piece, right? In the organization, there's communication, marketing as part of your outward communication. And when you go dark, or your message is inconsistent or far between, well, it's amazing how sales follow, right? And it follows the same thing. And so if there's ever a time to communicate more, to your point, it's a time of crisis. Then in a financial situation, if there's ever a time to be more focused on reaching your consumer through marketing, it's during that time period. And it's people that don't understand that tend to govern those decisions because they can't see and feel it. It's not important to them.
And here's the thing that I also learned by working from large corporations that have survived centuries.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that, and they will agree with what you just said, but they'd also say internal communications is probably even more important than external communications. And the internal communications, we have to have an internal communication strategy that lives outside of HR, because HR is not internal communications, and it's not it's actually living in its own beast.
Yep.
Working with the C-suite or in the C-suite, right? And because if your internal comms, if the people are not bought inside, it doesn't matter what you say outside, because the internal squash that as fast as it's going out, right?
Yeah.
So you got to start in before you work out. But
Mm-hmm.
most businesses I know, okay, they go out first,
Right.
and don't invest in. And then when a looming crisis is coming, they squash out, and now they have nothing in or out. How well do we think that happens? Because in what I learned in my MBA program, I think like the first day of marketing class, my professor did a very good job and said, what do you think is the most integral part to any organization? What do you absolutely have to have? And so I went to a school where there's a lot of engineering students as well as business students. So a lot of the engineering students would say, well, you got to have an inventor, a product. And then some would say, well, if you can't produce the product, it doesn't really matter. So you got to have the machines and the blah, 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 and the supply chain, and all this stuff was being said. And then I was like, customers. You can have all the stuff in the world, but if you don't have a customer, you don't have a business, right?
You don't have demand for your product, forget it.
So who sells your product the best?
Mm-hmm. People.
The people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you cut off the very thing, you have no business.
Right, because if you have the best marketing plan in the world, if you don't have the support behind it to fill it, it just doesn't work. So you bring them to the door, you bring them through the door, and there's nothing there but an empty shell. Well,
that's right.
Yeah.
So I guess another main takeaway from this conversation is, if you've learned nothing else, do not cut your communications. I would say most people listening to this program probably go back to your budgets and probably cut somewhere else and add to your communications. Because if you're going, why are we having employee retention problem? Why are we not attracting the right people? How come the culture feels a little toxic? How come we're getting all these complaints? How come we can't seem to hold on to our customers? It's not, marketing is one thing, communications is another, and it sounds like a communications problem.
Yeah.
So Chris, any last words? It's not last will and testament, don't worry, it's just last words for the program.
And it's Uncomfortable Monday.
No, I really, from a communication standpoint, is be deliberate in your messaging and your processing, and nest it inside your culture and your purpose, and you'll be okay. It may not be perfect, but you'll be okay. You'll get through it.
I like that, and I'll take a next step. I'm just gonna, because I'm in communication, so I like my words. Communications is your culture.
Yeah.
It's not something that just helps build, it is your culture. Anybody here been in a relationship? I think we can all say that communication is an integral part and sets the tone for the relationship. Or doesn't, which is also a problem. Good luck, Chris. That's all I gotta say to you as he shakes his head no.
He has a cat.
Which, is there anything you'd like to add, Mark, before we close it out?
So I think where I would go is for an organization when they usually have like a mission, vision, values, depending on the level of the organization, that in their decision in that mission, vision, value, there's somewhere in there's a brand, right? And so often we lose focus on our values and our messaging and the actions we take, and that it's critical to relate back your action and your communication to your mission, vision, values. Because if they're out of sync, then you will have folks in your organization and on your teams throwing that back at you, saying, "Look, you're saying this is who we are, and now you're saying X over here in this communication." And so they really have to be one cohesive plan or piece of how everybody's acting and working together to get through the crisis. Because again, I've seen it where people just throw it back in your face, like, "Look, you're saying this is who we are, but look at the decision you just made." Sometimes you have to make a decision, but you communicate that decision and why up front. Because everything is not in a perfect world, but again, it's transparency, right?
Transparency.
But I think the number one reminder that I got today is that the internal piece is such a key component first, because you got to have the people in the engine align to meet the expectations that are going to be coming out. So if it's keeping people coming in the door, the other way you keep the door open is by generating sales, being cost effective in what you're doing, and mitigate turnover, right? And so I think that internal piece was probably the best reminder I got today of just how important that is. Because sometimes we just lose sight of that because everybody's so focused on the numbers.
Oh, 100%. And brand is purpose. I think we got to understand. A lot of times out in the world, right, when you hear the word brand, you think logo, you think advertising, you think all those external things. Brand should be synonymous with purpose. And where do you build purpose first? It's not outward. It's inward, and inward grows outward. So if you're starting outward, and like you said, I love that, Mark, it's like your customer, calls with a question about a product. And that engagement does not reflect everything external. Trust broken, customers not coming back.
Yep.
So that's why you got to invest internally first before you start external.
Yep.
Right. So thank you for that. I'm going to wrap up, or I could talk all day. Chris knows this. Chris will vouch for me when I say that. And I don't just like hearing myself speak. I like having conversations and debates. I cannot lie. But anyway, so thank you for tuning in to Evolve Together with Empower People here on ESPN Richmond, powered by MikeKingBiz. I'm your host, Tiffany Joy Greene, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. We hope today's episode inspired you, provided valuable insights, made you laugh, and empowered you to take the next step in your purpose-driven journey. Don't forget to connect with Empower People on social media, share your thoughts, and join the Empower People community, where education, connection, and support is offered to mission and purpose-driven leaders to drive positive impact and empower people. Until next time, keep evolving, stay empowered, and remember that together we can achieve greatness. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you on the next episode of Evolve Together with Empower People.